A fan favourite kind of miniature that appears in lots of different war games is the classic zombie, and painting them is lots of fun because you can approach painting their skin in lots of different ways. In this video we're going to be showing you 3 different methods that you can use to paint your zombies, or a few extra little details at the end to bring a bit of life to them, things like gore for example. Now we're going to be using some of the new Deadwalker zombies from Warhammer Age of Sigmar, but it's worth noting that the techniques we're going to be using can be applied to many kinds of zombies for lots of different games. So be it Zombiecide or Walking Dead All Out War, this video is going to be useful to you. We hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you at the desk. When it comes to painting zombie flesh, there's really an unlimited amount of different skin tones you can go for, but when I'm doing it, I'll typically approach it in the same sort of way that I approach painting living flesh, and that is to go in a 4-stage process, whereby I start out with a base coat to establish the overall tone of the skin, and then wash it, often with a sort of warm colour to give the impression of muscle and blood underneath the flesh. Now, more on that later in the case of zombies, but after that, I then move on to layering it for starting to build up a highlight really, by doing lots of thin layers, gradually applying it more and more towards the tops of the muscles, to get nice smooth highlights on there, and then finish off with a fine highlight, and this will be applied quite precisely to really pick out the important features of it, so the facial expression for example. Now in the case of zombies, when you're following this method, the important thing to note is that you don't want to make them look too alive, of course, because they're zombies. So what you need to do, even though you might want to use a warm tone somewhere in there, is make sure you use some cold tones as well. So often what you'll find that I tend to do is apply a warm shade on something like a flesh tone kind of wash, but when I start moving on to the layering, I'll start going to cold tones, and you'll certainly see that example just here. Now in this video we're going to go through 3 different tones, but the first one we're going to go into detail to show you exactly how this process is done in action when painting these zombies, and I'm going to go for one that's actually inspired by a picture I saw from The Walking Dead, which is kind of like a really dried out greyish kind of tone. And to do this, what you need to do is start out with a dark grey colour. So I'm going to go for Mechanicus Standard Grey for this, apply with my regiment brush here, and this is just going to be blocking in the entire skin just to get things rolling and just to, as I mentioned, establish that overall tone. Now the miniature I'm using, I've actually undercoated using Zandri dust spray from Citadel, and you can really do this over any undercoat colour you want to start from, so it's entirely up to you. The reason why I've gone for Zandri dust is that it's actually a great starting point for loads of different colours that you'll often find being used on zombies, so all their clothes for example. And also on the Academy website we have a full painting guide on painting these miniatures, which starts out from this colour too, so it's just convenient to start from here. But as I mentioned, you can really go from any colour you want. But for this first step, all you've got to do is look for all the skin and just block it out with 2 thin coats. I've got that even base coat on the skin, so now I'm ready to move on to the second phase, which is to apply a wash to it to give that definition, and in this case a little hint of warmth. And I'm not looking to overdo this, so the layering is going to tone it down later, but here I'm going to be using some Reikland Fleshshade, which is a great colour for this sort of thing. And what this is going to do is give that subtle warmth which represents things like blood and muscle beneath the skin, because skin being translucent, we want to have that sort of effect. So we'll build on it in the next step when we start layering, but for now we need to apply that wash. So Reikland Fleshshade, which I'm going to be painting on again using that regiment brush, and I like to use a palette for this sort of thing for some control as to how much exactly I'm putting on. But all you got to do is just start painting it over the skin so it settles in the recessed details. So over here, for example, so it gives that hint of colour in those recessed areas mostly. That wash is now completely dry, and you can see we've got the hint of warmth, but also it's got an ever so slight rotten appearance because it's going over the top of that grey. So perfect for zombies, and what we need to do now is move on to the main phase of painting the skin, which is to do the layering. And it's here that we start to build up highlights, because for this kind of thing we need to go into it assuming we need to apply multiple thin coats, but each one is going to get more kind of directed really than the previous one. So we start to focus it more and more into areas where we want to have the light catching to really build up that volume on the miniature. So for this I'm going to be using some Dawnstone, and to apply it I've gone for a slightly smaller brush now. I'm actually using a medium layer from Citadel for this. And I'm using my wet palette of course, which helps here, but you can do the same thing on a dry palette if you want. But what you need to do is to thin the paint down enough so that you can see it's nice and translucent on here. So kind of bringing it down to around about this point here, you see, which means if I paint it thinly, you can see how thin it is and you can see the palette showing through. So I'm happy with that. With that prepared, I'm now going to start applying it, just making sure I don't have loads on the brush. And what I'm looking to do is to pick on all the kind of raised up areas and avoid the recesses, so I retain that definition from the wash. So for example, along there and along here like that, and you can see I'm quite selectively staying away from those recesses. So even on here, there's a few shallow recesses that I want to avoid to give that emaciated appearance, so kind of along there and along there. And it's just a matter of sort of working your way around the miniature like this, always looking for those darker areas and just carefully avoiding them. Now with that first coat dry, you can then move in for the second coat, and if it's thin enough, you'll see it dries very quickly. But this second one, we can now focus towards the areas that are going to catch the light. So for example, just running a little bit along there, on these ridges here, sort of towards the top of them, and you can see what that starts to do is increase that volume of the colour and starts to give a nice highlight showing through. So again, I'll just show it on this arm. So if I follow this muscle along here, and then skip the recess and go down here, and on the back just here, and on the top on the shoulder. So that first coat is quite thin and quite translucent, but as I go in to apply that second one, I'm looking to go towards the top where the light's going to be catching from the top. So I'm looking at this area here, just apply it to that part there. Same with the forearm, just a bit towards the top there, and on the shoulder, a bit around here. And you can see this way, I'm increasing that shape of the muscle and starting to get a nice highlight showing through. So now it's just a matter of doing this all over the flesh, just taking your time, just gradually building up the colour like this. And here we have the model with that layering complete, and as you can see, it just really brings out all the shape of that muscle. And now we can move on to the next thing, which is actually just before the highlighting. It's almost a 3.5 step here, which is great for undead, and it's entirely optional. But that's to add just a hint of colour to them that really sells the fact that they're dead. And for this, what you need is some Carroburg Crimson. And if you decide to do this, what we're going to do is just thin it down on the palette and wash it onto certain areas to make it appear a little bit more bloodshot or a bit more wounded, that sort of thing. So you don't need very much of this, and water is just fine for this sort of effect. Just thin it down so it's quite thin there like that, and not quite so strong as it is straight out the pot. And with this, all you do is just introduce it onto areas where we've got things like open wounds. So for example, you can see we've got these little ones around here, so I just tend to run it around parts like that, into some recesses as well to increase the redness of them. So for example, around there like that, and you can see the subtle effect, but it really just helps sell the fact that they're dead. Now you might have twigged that these guys have got some branches growing out of them, so I tend to do it kind of going around those areas, so around there like that, for example. And also looks particularly good when you get the bags under the eyes. I've added that hint of red, which you can see really does help emphasise the fact that this guy is dead. So it's a very subtle thing to do, very quick to do, but really fun to do as well. And with that done, we can now go back to our 4 stages, because we're on the 4th one now, which is to add that highlight to the miniature. Now, when you're doing greys like this for flesh, what I recommend you do when you get to that final highlight is go for more of a khaki or more of a bone kind of colour here, because if you go for a grey by comparison, it can look a bit artificial and we need to look more organic. So going for those sort of khaki colours is great for that. And to do this, I'm going to use some Karak Stone, which is a great all-purpose colour for this kind of thing, applied using a small airbrush from Citadel here for lots of control. And with this, what I'm looking to do is to emphasise all the main features and details that stand out the most. So it's quite precise here. So to help doing that, just make sure that paint's nicely thinned and that you've got a good point in your brush. And really what we're looking for is, for example, on the face, this is a great place to start for this sort of thing. Looking to bring out that expression. So that means starting by going down the centre of the nose, so just a little bit there like that. A little bit on the brows, just a very small amount just there. A bit on the cheekbone, a bit just at the top of the mouth. So you see it's all these kind of sharper edges that I'm just picking out. And it just helps really bring out the expression on the face just there. In addition, we want to do some of this on the rest of the body too, and the fingers are usually a great starting point here, so just lightly following down along those joints there like that, and following the tendons going up the hand. But when we get to the muscles, you can see there's the lighter parts that we've done towards the top, and all I'm going to do is emphasise them a little bit more by just applying a bit of this colour onto those areas. So just there, for example, and just there. With that highlight applied, you can see all the detail popping out really nicely, and now we're just going to add one more feature to this particular scheme, and that is to pick out the eyes, because on zombies, it looks really creepy if you do this. And you don't have to worry about painting any pupils or anything like that. All you need is a sort of milky white colour to get that proper zombie feel for it. And for this, Pallid Witch Flesh is a great choice, and if you're going to do it, go for a really small brush. So I'm now using a detail brush here from the Army Painter. And to do this, a huge part of it is just making sure the paint's thinned down correctly, because you want it running so that it flows from your brush easily, but not so running that it runs out of control. So you're just going to kind of find that sweet spot on your palette. So add water as you need to until it gets to around about that point there. So you see it's quite runny there, but to make sure it doesn't go out of control, I'm just going to get rid of the excess off in some tissue, load up just a small amount there, and then we're ready to go. And with this, all you need to do is just hold your hands as steady as possible, just gently moving the tip of the brush right to the eyes, and just do a little white dot in that area. So we're looking at just there like that to get the impression of the zombie. Now, if you wanted to add a magical effect to this, what you could do after doing this is apply a thin down contrast paint over the area, for example, a green to get sort of like an eldritch magic glow. The choice is yours. I'm just going to stick to this white here to have the classic zombie appearance. And here we have the completed grey zombie flesh, which you can see is a great example of the general stages I use here. So 4 main stages of painting the skin with a few little optional areas along the way to add a bit more, unlife to it, I suppose you could say. Now what we're going to do now is move on to a different tone, and this is going to be for a zombie that was very recently alive. So it's going to be much warmer, not really warm though in the sense of a living thing here. And you'll see we're going to use some colder colours, but it's going to be sympathetic towards that kind of thing. And to do this, we're going to start out with Rakarth Flesh, which is great for a sort of dead skin tone to start out with. And then after that, we're going to apply some Reikland Fleshshade over the top in the same way we did with the previous one, for the same sort of reason, for that hint of warmth to it, but not so much. And we are going to cool it down later on though. So first of all, we need that Rakarth Flesh, and to apply it, once again, I'm going to be using my regiment brush. And like with that previous tone, for this first colour, all we're looking to do is to block in all of the skin with it. So just an even base coat across all of it. So as ever, make sure the paint's thinned down, and then all you got to do is start painting it over that skin. So it's just a matter of looking for all the flesh and just blocking it in with 2 thin coats. Once the even base coat's been established, you're then ready to move on to applying that Reikland Fleshshade all over the skin once more. The wash is now completely dry, so we're ready to move on to the 3rd and 4th stages, and also we're going to add that hint of red in the middle once again. And so here what we need first of all is some Flayed One Flesh for the layer, then we're going to add that touch of Carroburg Crimson before moving on to the highlight. And here we can use Pallid Flesh, for which we can also pick out the eyes at the same time. But first we need that Flayed One Flesh, and this is a very nice colour for zombies because it's very cold, it's ideal for what we want just here. And to apply it, remember what we need to do with this layer is go into this assuming that we need to apply multiple thin coats and to take advantage of that to build up that volume on the muscles. So on your palette, make sure you thin it down to test it for that translucency. And this is quite a thin colour anyway, so it's quite easy to bring it to the right sort of point. You can see I'm just testing it here on the palette just to see if it's nice and see-through. So that's the kind of appearance of what we're looking to go for there. So I'm happy with that. So with this ready, we can now start applying it to the muscles. And remember, what we're looking to do is to avoid the recessed areas and paint on the raised parts. So if we look around the chest just there, what I'm looking to do is to apply it over areas such as this, and you can see how thin it is and translucent, but that's ideal for what we want here, because this first coat, I can just go around looking for these flatter areas, picking them out and avoiding the darkest recesses. So along there, for example, along there, down there, and because it's being applied so thinly, it also dries very quickly, which means once I've painted a certain area, I can then go back for that second coat, looking just to increase the strength of the colour on those raised areas to gain that definition on these details. I finished that layering, so now I'm going to move on to that optional step of adding some Caribou Crimson to add some red details onto the body. And once again, this has been thinned down with some water, and I'm looking to paint it around areas like open wounds, such as just here, also into some of the recesses, for example, just in there, just to add a bit of colour to those parts, and also, of course, around the eyes as well. And then finally, we're ready to move on to the highlighting stage. And here what we need is Pallid Flesh. And as before, we're looking for all the most defined features, and we just want to work our way around picking them out. So I tend to start on the face, looking for things like the brows, the nose, the chin, all areas like that. But in addition, with this colour, we can also use it to pick out the eyes by just bracing our hands really steadily, just adding a white dot to that area. And with that highlight applied, the tone is finished, and here we have a freshly dead zombie, so another great one to mix into your zombie hordes. The next one we're going to go for is a much yellower tone, almost like the zombie's been stuck at the bottom of a bog or something like that and become really rotten. So I'm going to put in some tints of green in there as well, and we're going to be running through the same sort of order for this. And so what we need to do is start out with our base coat, and here we're going to use some Tallarn Sand. Now after that, to wash it, this time we're going to use some Seraphim Sepia to really build up that yellow, and then to layer it, we're going to use some Morghast Bone. Now after that, we're going to do that optional step of adding a tint of colour, and here we're going to go green, so some Athonian Camoshade here. And then finally for the highlight, what we need is Flayed One Flesh. But first we need that Tallarn Sand, and for this I'm going to be applying it using the regiment brush, and remember this is just that base coating stage, so all you got to do is make sure the paint's nicely thinned down, and then it's just a matter of blocking in all that skin with 2 thin coats. With that base coat done, we're then ready to apply our wash, and this time we're going for Seraphim Sepia, which is really going to build up that yellow and give a really rotten appearance. With the wash dry, we're then ready to move on to Morghast Bone for our layer, and remember this to make sure you thin it down so when you paint it on it's translucent, so you can build up those multiple thin coats to increase the colour towards the top of all the muscles towards the light source. Once you're finished with the layering, you're then ready for that optional step of adding those patches of colour if you want to. And this time, rather than using red, we're going to go for green. So I've got some Athonian Camoshade here. I'm going to apply this around wounds and under the eyes once again, just to give a slightly more rotten appearance to some details on the miniature. And finally, we need some Flayed One Flesh to apply a highlight, once again looking for all those sharper features and gently picking them out. And in addition, if you want to, you can then pick out the eyes using some Pallid Wych Flesh, or just single eye in the case of this particular miniature. And here we have the completed skin. Now I've blocked in those rags with Mechanicus standard grade just so the colour of the flesh really stands out against it, and you can see it's a really horrible, rotten looking colour, really disgusting. But with that done, what we're going to do now is move on to the next thing, which is going to be guts, because often zombie models will have some guts hanging out of them, and a great way to paint them is to first of all block them out with a deep red. So for this, I like to use some Wazdakka red. After that, you need to key it out from the surrounding area. So here a dark brown wash is great, and I'm going to use some Agrax Earthshade for this. And then to give that real blood effect, what you need is some blood for the blood god. But first of all, we need that Wazdakka red, and to apply it, I'm going for my medium layer brush here from Citadel, though any kind of smaller brush will do. All you've got to do is use this to block out those areas, being careful of the skin as you're painting it in. So make sure your brush has got a good amount of paint on there, not overloaded, and then it's just a matter of identifying these details and picking them out. So in this case, you can see we've got some around here. It's going to be really careful as I base coat these details. Once you've applied the red base coat, the next thing you need is a dark brown wash. And this is mainly just to block this area out from the surrounding details. So all you need to do is just wash it over the top like that so it settles on either side, giving that darker line. And once the wash is completely dry, all you need to do is apply some blood for the blood god over the top of the guts. And there you go, a nice easy way of painting guts. But of course, this isn't going to be the only instance of gore on your zombies, because often they're going to have some open wounds, and also they might have been eating some brains, in which case you want some blood around the mouth. Now, if you're going to do this, blood for the blood god again is excellent. But when you get blood really thick and it starts to congeal, it goes almost black. So we're going to add some of that too. For this, what we need is some matte black. But first, what I'm going to do is add some of that blood for the blood god on its own to our more recently dead zombie. And to do this, first of all, what we need to do is apply it, but a little bit thin so some of the colours beneath show through. So in this case, water it down. Just a little bit of water mixed in there, and use a smaller brush for it. I'm using my small airbrush here. So bring it down to about that sort of point there. Then using this, what we can do is start building it up. And I'm going to start around the mouth as if he's just been eating on something. So what I'm going to do is just introduce it into around where the teeth are. So just in there like that, poking it round, and then just sort of bringing it round the face so it starts to collect around there like that. And you can see, because it's thinned down, some of those colours beneath show through, so it gives some nice highlighting, and you can still see the details. And the stronger you want it to be, the more coats you can add. Now, in addition, I'm going to introduce it onto some of these open wounds that we've got. So these ones, for example, just leaving some of those ribs showing, so kind of on there, and then have it running down a little bit at the front, so it's sort of trickling down like the skin's been torn away. And you can see doing this is actually really fun, and it really does create a sense of narrative to your miniatures, and it can be quite addictive actually doing this. So remember, think of it like weathering. So be sure to slowly add it until you're happy, then be sure to stop there, because it's much harder to take this kind of effect away. But I'm just going to add a bit more around the mouth to make that red a little bit stronger. And there we go. Now, in addition, what I want to do is to make it really dark around the mouth, as if it's been, eating quite a lot. So there's quite a lot there. So now what we need to do is to create that mix. So I've got some matte black here already on my palette. I'm going to get a little bit more blood for the blood god. What I'm going to do is just bring some of that black into it. So just a little bit, start mixing it in there so I get a much, much darker red there like that. So I want it to be sort of like that sort of colour just there. And once you've got that, it's just a matter of, again, making sure you don't have loads and loads in your brush, and just start dotting it on to where you want the blood to be thickest. So in this case, once again, we're looking at the mouth, and what we're going to do is just start bringing it on this sort of area down the bottom here where it would be thickest. So just along there like that. And here we have our zombie with all that congealed blood on his face, going down his chin, on his hand, all over him. And as you can see, doing this adds lots of character to the miniature and lots of life as well, which is a weird thing to say because they're dead. But as you've seen, doing this is really fun and very simple as well. And we've now shown you 3 fantastic, easy ways you can run through to paint zombie skin. Now, this recipe will work with a million different colours. It's very easy to make up your own combinations here, so I certainly encourage you to do so. So don't be stumped by it. Just go back to the root of this video and you'll find some great ideas. And once you've got one you like, you can stick with it and you'll get some great results. Anyway, have fun painting your zombies, and we'll see you again very soon. We don't know why they've got roots growing out of them. We have no idea.
I'm stumped.